without any further ado, help me introduce Mr. Stephen Lee.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you very much, Realtors, for inviting me today. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak in front of our communities, and you guys do great work in really helping our community members, our residents, first-time home buyers, etc., find what is a house and turning it into a home. And we really want to thank you for helping us do things like that. So my name is Stephen Lee. I'm a council member for the city of Rosemead. Leon, thank you very much for the very warm introduction. I was the mayor of the city of Rosemead, and hopefully in about a couple more months, I'll be the mayor again. My term for mayor comes up again, so my colleagues will be hopefully reappointing me for that. So Revitalize California is an organization that was started about 4 or 5 months ago, and the focus of that was to bring back redevelopment. For those who may not necessarily know, redevelopment was a tool that cities had for close to 70 years, up until about 6 or 7 years ago when Governor Brown decided to eliminate it as part of his budget. Cities, local governments like Rosemead would use that funding source that we would get from what is called tax increment, which would be basically the idea of if you have property that's blighted, property that is a fixer-upper, if you will, and nothing's happening with it. Well, the city would say, if we build something on it in the future and we improve this area now so we can build upon it in the future, then what's going to happen is the tax we would normally get, where it's a new, nicer property versus an older property, would obviously be a big difference. So we're going to take that money in the future and invest it now. If you will, it's almost like borrowing in the future to invest it now, so you can build something nice. Well, overall, that's the funding source. Well, Governor Brown eliminated that in 2014, 2013 or so. And when he did that, he basically eliminated the city's ability to take this money source and invest it locally. So in the city of Rosemead, what did we do with this money? We used it to rebuild our 2 pools. We used it to rebuild a gym. We recently used what's left that money to build a skate park for the kids. We were upgrading our sewer system with it so that you could have more development along Garvey Avenue, things like that. Other cities, Alhambra, used it more for actual commercial development. So Main Street, I know I saw a listing earlier for Main Street, for example. All of Main Street was a redevelopment project. The theater that's there, all the way down to the auto auction area, that's all under redevelopment. San Gabriel, things like the Hilton Hotel, what you're seeing with the Sheraton, etc. All these projects were part of a redevelopment area. A lot of the projects you see here, a lot of the big commercial projects you see here in the San Gabriel Valley comes from that type of redevelopment source. So when that funding was cut in 2013, 2014, those projects pretty much were put on a hold. I was at a council meeting in Culver City talking about Revitalize California recently, and they didn't get to my item until 2 o'clock in the morning, but during that meeting, one of the big issues they were talking about was that they wanted to build their equivalent of Grand Central Market in downtown, with all the different food shops and whatnot. Culver City wanted to do their equivalent of that. And part of that conversation in their presentation at the council meeting was that this project got delayed for about 5 years because of the elimination of redevelopment. Well, a couple of really smart people in Sacramento got together several months ago and they said, you know what? Now might be the time to bring it back. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that Governor Brown is leaving office. He's termed out. Yeah. Right? So, yeah, exactly, right? I'm with you on that one. So he's leaving, which means the person who's been anti-redevelopment is leaving as well. The second part is that you have a governor's race now, right? You have Gavin Newsom, the big three. You have Gavin Newsom, Antonio Villaraigosa, and John Chang, right? These 3 are all running. The nice thing is all 3 have now said, yes, we support bringing back redevelopment. So we're using this kind of momentum of what they're saying to kind of shift the conversation, right? That's number 2. Number 3, there's a huge housing crisis and a huge housing shortage in California. It's no stranger that, when you have homes that are overpriced, there's a shortage of it, they need to build more, right? Well, in the past, redevelopment had a set-aside funding source in there that said cities could use up to certain amounts of money to build affordable housing for their communities, right? So we see redevelopment as a way to continue to expand that. And I know that I didn't bring enough context, and I apologize about that. I wasn't sure how big or small the crowd was today. but in one of the handouts I gave out was how we would bring back redevelopment, what the new redevelopment would look like. And I think it says draft document on it. It's actually fresh off the press. The consultants at Revitalize just developed that document. And it outlines some key things. The first one is we would bring back what are known as project areas. So a project area is, in a city, the area that we say we're going to capture the future money out of, and we're going to shift it back and invest it now, right? So it allows us to do that. Second thing we're going to say is all the old money that's now being diverted back into the state from the old redevelopment agencies, which is what's happening right now, because these were like 30, 40-year deals, will now then be reshifted back to local government, right, to local agencies. Then we're also going to say we're going to put in additional $500 million a year set aside for affordable housing projects. So we can really begin reconstructing and constructing new homes here in California, which obviously benefits you guys all as realtors. Then we would also add in other sources of funding for infrastructure repair, for road repair, etc. So the philosophy and the thoughts were, if you improve the overall infrastructure of a community, right, then that improves the value of that community, which improves the property values of both commercial and residential properties. And so that's kind of how we're looking at doing it on in terms of redevelopment, was bringing back those things. And then there's some more technical things that are about what cities might or might not like. In there, in the past, eminent domain was a very controversial issue. The ability for the city to come in or an agency to come in and just buy a property outright and you didn't have a right. Right, so things like that got limited in that in the past, cities did not want to build housing because obviously we're kind of built out as a community. So they would take that money and they would either not build it or they would just shift it back, etc. And so in here, in this new agreement that we're trying to propose, we're saying no, cities would be required, if they want a redevelopment agency, they'd be required to use that money to build actual housing projects, to build actual mixed-use projects, etc. Things like that. So we recognize that Governor Brown did point out some issues with redevelopment, but we thought that throwing the baby out with the bathwater was a bad idea. So what we're saying is we want to bring it back, and we're going to bring it back reformed. So there are things that were controversial in the past that we're going to fix, and now we're proposing. So that's the how, and that's the what. Now it's the when. The when is, it starts right now. This big gubernatorial race, this race for the governor's, this big race for the governor's seat, is really important for us because we have to convince, and we've done it actually for the most part, we've convinced John Cheng and Antonio Villaraigosa to support us and our proposal, the way that we want to do it. They support that. Now we're working with Gavin Newsom's office trying to convince them of that. Our thoughts are if you can convince all three by the June primary, if the top two candidates support redevelopment and what we're saying we're going to bring back, then what's going to happen is the budget staff has to present a budget by January 2019. So between June, the problem is this, the governor gets elected in November. So that means he only has less than 6 weeks to get his first budget out to Sacramento. Now obviously that's not really enough time to do the whole budget of the state of California. So the budget staff, the old budget staff, the current budget staff, starts working on it. They start working on it around June, right? It takes about 6 months to get a budget ready to go. So what's going to happen is if both candidates support this, the budget staff then sees this as, okay, well, this is what they want. So we're going to start writing the budget and incorporating these concepts into that proposal, right? So then in January, you will see redevelopment be put back into the budget. So that's step one. Step two after that is we're going to defend it. And that's where I'm hoping you guys can come in. We need realtors up there. We need developers up there. We need council members. We need everybody up in Sacramento talking to their local legislative people saying we have to keep this in the budget. This is going to be vital in terms of helping us fix the infrastructure in our community, build new homes, and give local government the tools they need again to begin repairing the communities that we've been stagnant about for the last close to 10 years. If that gets accomplished, then in June, when the budget gets adopted, then we'll see the recreation of redevelopment back in local agencies. And I think for realtors like yourself, that will be a huge benefit to be able to argue for communities, even an empty plot of land. instead of the local government just saying, hey, you know, we can only zone it a certain way, maybe it's mixed use, maybe it's commercial, maybe it's residential, whatever you guys are selling it as, you can also say, well, we can also work with that. This is in a project area for redevelopment. We can talk to the city. They might be able to, or they might be willing to front up some of the costs in development. And that might help you guys close that deal a little bit better, a little bit easier, maybe a little bit of a higher commission as well. So that's kind of what we're looking at. This is what Revitalize is trying to do. We're going to each city right now. We're trying to convince my neighbor, my colleagues in other cities to join our organization, to be a part of it. Or, you know, we're hoping you guys can come on board as affiliates or coalition partners, if you will. And when the time comes, we can kind of activate, you know, this grassroots movement and really restoring power back to local agencies and local government and to local hands so that we can really improve our communities overall. So that's kind of my overall presentation. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, any thoughts, any concerns you might have. Yes, sir.
How do we join?
If you give me your contact, I'll get you in touch with our executive director. Cities join, but we would love to have you as a coalition partner. Just kind of help out, you know, be part of our newsletter, and then when time comes, you know, when we have to rally and we have to bug Ed Chow or whoever the new state senator is going to be, we can bug them about it. So absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Who are the members?
Right now, St. Gabriel's joined, Rosemead, obviously.
That's a city?
Cities. Only cities can be members. We're asking for you to be our coalition partners. So if you want to be on board, just give us your contact, your card. I'll get it to our executive director. He'll add you to our database. Certainly, we can find other ways for you to be a part of our process as well. If you could also talk to the State Realtors Association, getting them on board as well. That's going to be very important, is convincing them to be a part of this process once we get to the Sacramento side of the house. You know, oftentimes we know that Sacramento is very detached from the rest of us. They think they know better than everybody else. You know, it's run differently up there. So we need as much allies up there as possible as well. And so I know you guys are a chapter of the California Realtors, so any assistance we can get from you to convince them to be a part of this process as well is going to be very vital. Yes, sir.
As a realtor, and so how we can be convinced which if this money comes back to the local government, will it not be abused like you have been abused in the past?
There were definitely some abuses in the past. I'm not, you know, to be perfectly frank, there were some cities that did it incorrectly. But 99% of the cities did it correctly. Like I said, in the city of Rosemead, we spent $4 million rebuilding the 2 pools that we had that were 60 years old. Right? We recently took that money and we bought a new park. So we actually have an 1.5 acre of parkland coming on board. The city of Rosemead's philosophy was we had to improve our infrastructure. Right? But once we improve our infrastructure, that's when development will come in. Right? So that's what we did with that. Like I said, the city of Alhambra, however, went a different path. They said, let's focus on building a downtown. From Main Street, let's just build Main Street up very nicely, right? So different cities have different philosophies on it. There were some abuses. City of Industry abused it a little bit. They, instead of building housing, they shifted the money into other areas. City of Bell, City of Verdon, there were definitely some issues, right? But for the most part, though, 90% of the cities did it correctly. The way to reduce that type of corruption, if you will, is part of the reform efforts that we're bringing about. So we're saying now you have to use the money, the money that's been set aside for housing, you have to build housing with it. And there's going to be checks and balances that forces cities to build housing with that money. We're saying that eminent domain will be very much controlled. We can't just force a homeowner, a property owner to sell to the city just because we wanted to. It's called the Kelo decision. It's a Supreme Court decision. So there are things like that that we are adding into it. It's in the document there that states what kind of things we're allowing and not allowing now as part of a proposal as a way to kind of limit the amount of potential abuse that comes with it. Any other questions? Thank you very much.